Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about Sargent's drawing techniques. So this goes far beyond Sargent as an artist. It was really a movement that started much earlier, around like the 1600s, with artists like Velasquez and even El Greco was showing abstraction way before Sargent ever grasped the concept. But really, if we can study Sargent and how he actually captured a likeness, we can really start to understand how to apply it to our own work. So, to understand how Sargent actually captured a likeness so well, you have to look back at what his teacher was actually studying. So, his teacher was Carolus Duran, and Carolus Duran was a very unique person in academic circles because originally, prior to what he was teaching at his atelier, the technique, generally speaking, for doing a painting was doing an extremely complex underdrawing first and then actually slowly layering it up, almost like with glazing or something like that. But what Carolus Duran found out, and this is more off the heels of Velasquez, was that you can just use mass painting techniques and shapes to actually capture a likeness even more accurately than doing it the old academic way. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what that means, what abstraction is, how to use shapes for likenesses, and all sorts of things like that. So back in the day, this is what an underdrawing would sort of look like. Maybe it wouldn't have as much tonal stuff going on, but maybe they would do an underpainting, like a chromatic underpainting would look like this. But it'd look extremely tight, you'd have all the details in, and then eventually it'll just get covered up by paint. So, what Carolus Duran taught Sargent to do was to really look for the big masses of shapes. And you can see all over his work, everything is extremely shapely. So, Sargent said a lot that what he did is that he didn't paint anything that he didn't see. Now, that's actually true to a certain effect, but what he was doing essentially was painting something that he didn't see, and that was the simplification of what was there. So there's probably a lot of pores that he was able to see on his skin here. There was wrinkles and creases and stuff, but he didn't actually indicate any of that. He didn't add in that information because it was superfluous. It was unnecessary towards the point of the painting, which was just the general masses. And when you start thinking in that sort of way and not adding in a bunch of unnecessary detail, your paintings will look better and they'll actually look even more real. So you'll see, like on Instagram, it'll, all these new age art platforms, these hyper realistic charcoal drawings or graphite drawings mostly, and they'll just feel a little bit dead. They don't feel like they have the kind of zest in life that this era, like the Gilded Age, kind of had. And that's because they're killing the drawing with too much detail. When things have less detail, they actually look more realistic. Because we don't see any infinite detail, but that's kind of a different story about how we psychologically process art. But so I've been talking a lot about shape, and what does that actually mean? So shapes are, you have to think about it in a very fundamental sense. So in art fundamentals, you have line and you have shape, and then you also have form. So all of those are actually interrelated in an interesting way. So lines, we all know, is really just like a path, from one point to another. They can be curvy, they can be straight, whatever, but it's a linear sort of line, right? Now, what is an enclosed line? Well, that's a shape, right? We would call that a circle. We'd call that a triangle. Those are all the shapes that we know and love, that we learn in kindergarten. But shapes go a lot farther than those simple geometric shapes. They can also look more organic. And once you start filling up a canvas with shapes, you start creating images. So you can see here, this looks like a boy facing away from a camera. This is his hair. And it's made out of a bunch of simple shapes, So essentially, what you need to start thinking about if you want to paint like Sargent and the other great artists is you have to think more abstractly. And abstraction is just the essence of what's there. And the essence of what's there can be captured through shape. So if you look at this, for example, that right down his face, that's just a shape right there. That's just a dark shape. And if you were to record that shape, and this isn't going to be perfect, of course, but it'd be like something like that, right? And this might be like what you start out with. And then as you go along, you add a little bit more specifics to the shape. Maybe you form it around the beard or whatever. But as long as you can keep your shapes really, really simplified, then it makes the whole painting journey just so much easier. And a way that you can actually keep simplification is to do what Sargent did. And there's lots of recorded like testimony from people who saw his work or were even painted by him, that what he was doing is that he was always going to and fro from his canvas, and he was wearing the carpet thin from how much he was walking back. So he'd walk back 10 feet, 20 feet, whatever, so that he could actually see the big picture. And the big picture is where the big mistakes are found. If you mess up a tiny little shape, like a tiny little detail, people aren't going to really notice, but they will notice if you have big shape problems. And if you have those big fundamental problems, then you'll get the likeness off. And if you have value problems, then it won't even look like, like a good painting at all. So what you really need to start thinking about are these shapes. Maybe a little bit more of a demonstration would help. So I'm looking at this shape right here, for example, in his beard. And we know that it kind of just goes off of there. It's like a little bit triangular. And it kind of just slots in right there with the beard, right? So another thing when you're thinking about shapes is how they relate to each other. So if I can get this shape, this dark shape on the right side of his face here, and I can get the tiny shape made right here. It's actually all the same shape, but you can separate in your mind if you want. If I get both of these right, then I already get this shape right in his beard, So what drawing actually is just a puzzle of shapes. And once you start thinking about it like that, you're not drawing a nose, you're not drawing an ear, you're not drawing an eye. You're just drawing shapes. And it's so much easier to record that way, And once you can actually get like an intuitive idea of how to record all of these, then drawing becomes so much easier and it becomes a lot more fun as well. And, that's what people are really doing when they're getting good likenesses. And that's why also Sargent, there's like a saying from him is that the way that he got such a good likeness was by finding the shape of the skull. And you really should take that extremely literally, because he was talking about the literal shape of the skull. That's what matters. It wasn't the eyelash. Like you can't even see an eyelash on here. You can barely see the indication of, where his eyelid folds under. That's what he cared about. And that's what really does matter in painting. Now, you can go for a hyper-realistic look, but, it's not going to be looking like Sargent or Sorolla or even more contemporary artists, fantasy artists like, Frank Frazetta, They're always using the same techniques because a shape is a shape. Doesn't matter the medium, the time period, the whatever, But what you really need to think about is the accuracy. You need to think about the placement, and shapes are really everything. They're also proportion stuff. If you have a proportional issue, you have a shape issue, and once you get values, once you get all the shapes with the right value, then you have a painting, Edges are a different thing, but they're really secondary when it comes to shape, because if you have a shape problem, people are going to notice that first. They're not going to notice an edge problem as much. Now, if you fill an entire painting with really hard edges, then it's not going to look as great, if you have a lot more variance in your edges. But really, there's a hierarchy of what's important in art, and shape is really right up there because it relates to how good you are at drawing. That's really what you want to be thinking about. Now, a thing that a lot of people use is squinting. Squinting really helps you see. It just takes rid of all that detail and it makes it not look like an eye or a nose or a beard or whatever. And it helps you get the actual shape. So squinting is really good. Now, squinting does make all the values look darker in your painting. So that'll obscure things up and make them a little bit more difficult. But essentially, yeah, you're just going to be recording down shapes. That's all the drawing really is. That's how you draw this. That's how the eye right here is just like very, very simple shape. you know? That's all it is. And then you just fill it in with the right value, you know? Alter it a little bit. But there's no more detail than that. That's all it is, you know? So you need to be thinking about shapes. That's the word of the day. That's really how Sargent was getting everything. And drawing is fundamental to painting as well. You know, behind every good painter is a good draftsman. Every good painter could do this because they think in terms of values and shapes. And that's really all that drawing is. Color is just a very, very, very secondary element to those two. If your value is fucked up and your shapes are wrong, you're screwed. Doesn't matter how good your colors are. You know, it's really what matters. Even, I think I have some more Sargent studies over here. Let's see. There we go. Same thing. Shapes. I mean, if you look at his hair right here. That's just like a square shape. Right there. That's a shape too. His entire face, you know, that's just kind of like it's like kind of an oval shape, you know? Now there are certain ways that you can create really aesthetic shapes too. So certain shapes will look ugly by themselves abstractly. So I'm going to demonstrate that right now. The best way to make a shape look ugly is to make it too complex. So what do I mean by that? That's an ugly ass shape. Do not make a shape like this on the canvas, and do not fill an entire canvas with this. If you want to learn more about shape design, look at Cynic's shape design. He has some great videos on it. Marco Bucci's really good at describing this topic. But what you really want to grasp is that shapes abstractly can look aesthetic or they can look hideous like that. Now, if I was going to redraw this, I might simplify it like this. And that's just an S curve, another S curve, and that's, you know, more of a C curve or whatever. But that's a simplification, and this just looks a lot more aesthetic, you know. It could probably use a straight to make it look even better, because you could just look at the angle there, you know. But essentially, you know, Sargent wasn't actually painting what he saw because he would see infinite detail wherever he looked. But what he was doing is that he was simplifying the subject of what he saw. Because he didn't... The way that you know that he wasn't painting exactly what he saw is that his paintings don't look like real life exactly. They look like paintings, especially up close. Now, far away, they look hyper-realistic, you know, and that's part of the magic. But another good YouTube channel is Draw Mix Paint. He explains the, you know, having abstraction up close, but having it look right and beautiful from far away. He's great at describing that topic. Really interesting videos there. But if you look at a lot of his charcoal portraits here, they look really, really similar to how he painted things. And that's because his style was using shapes. It wasn't using color. It wasn't using, you know, whatever that he was using in his oil paintings. It was the way that he was actually arranging his shapes, you know. I can tell that was made by Sargent. I can tell that these are made by Sargent. That's obviously Sargent, you know. Of course, this is too. But yeah, I mean, as soon as you get that principle down, likenesses are just going to be a whole hell of a lot easier. They're going to be so much easier when you're not thinking about stuff so specifically. So I hope that helps. I hope you learned a few things about Sargent. This is my interpretation of what he was doing based on, you know, accounts from when he was alive, what he was saying, what his teachers were studying, even some of his own studies that he was doing, because there's a lot of oil paintings. You can look them up. There's even an exhibit going on right now. Depends on when you're watching this video, but of him doing paintings of like Las Menas by Velázquez, and he has a lot of studies up in the National Gallery of Art, and it's just a ton of paintings of other people's paintings, and they're all Velázquez and, you know, all those great artists. And what he was studying there were these same principles, you know, shape, edges, values, all that sort of stuff. And that's how he got really good. You know, there is an element of talent You know, there's an affinity for seeing drawing. Like even his mother said that at a very early age she had an accurate eye. But when it comes to things like talent and art, you know, you see that the best painters in history, the best draftsmen in history, doesn't matter, the best artists, they all believed that it was a skill that you could learn. It's the same with free will, you know. The people who believe in free will always have better lives, generally speaking. So it doesn't matter what's maybe even objectively true, it matters how it practically pans out. And if you believe that you can learn these skills and you can become just as good as Sargent, if you really bust your ass and you learn all this stuff, then you're going to go really fast and really far. So I hope that helped. I hope you all have a great day. I'll see you around soon.